Let's go ahead and call the meeting. Can we get started? Do we have, let's go ahead and do a roll call. I don't know who's joining us on via Zoom.
Chair Sanders,
Here.
Vice Chair Hibbard, committee members Perez and Dreesen,
Hi, yes, I'm here on Zoom, but I can't rename myself. It shows up as financial management.
committee member Holt,
Here.
Keller,
Here by Zoom.
Louis,
Present.
Prince, Roland,
Mr. Rowland's on his way. He's running about 10 minutes late.
and Tobias.
Here.
If Mr. Prince ends up joining over Zoom like he did last time, will you just let us know so we know that he's present? Thank you. And we're going to kind of switch the agenda just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and start, instead of adopting the minutes right away, let's go ahead and start with public comment if people filled out those cards. How many do we have? Five. And just for the record, we all received the public comments that were submitted either via email or voice message, and we were all able to read those in advance, so thank you for those.
Madam Chair, if I may also make one announcement.
Sure.
We have been limited in our ability to stream some of our meetings as we're updating our system, but we were actually able to make a special request to our vendor over this past week, and so this meeting is being streamed live through our city website.
Excellent. That's good progress. Can the viewers comment, or is there there's not? Okay, there's not like a chat. Okay.
Correct.
Excellent. So we have 5, and with the interest of time, we'll call everybody up one by one. If we could just remind everybody that we have 2 minutes for each speaker, and we could go ahead and start with Ms. Patel. And if you can, state your name before you start.
Hi, yeah, my name is Riddhi Patel. I'm from Bakersfield. But anyway, so I really wanted to stress that as you guys vote on this budget, that also none of this money should be going to the police at all. And if this is really supposed to be community-centered, I remind you that last summer, thousands also stated that they would like none of this. They would like money to actually be defunded from the police. And if you're actually talking about engaging the community in a participatory budgeting process, this isn't it. And so I also want to stress that, so last summer, they educated People's Budget Bakersfield, a Black-led group of organizers actually educated community members on the city council budget last year, and many were angry, rightfully so, with the budget, specifically showing that the police budget was taking up a majority of the budget, leaving the scraps roughly 43% for the remaining services. And keeping that in mind, that the same budget that only one service, the police, a racist, white supremacist agency, gets is roughly the same pool of money that every other service has to fight for to share. The priorities for investment that the community actually did show, which is available at peoplesbudgetbaco.com, that thousands of community members told you they wanted, was for racial equity policies and plans, education and youth developmental services, public health, specifically mental health as well, housing, building Black economic equity, and violence prevention, not by giving more money to the police, which I am very much stressing that at any point, a lot of these elected officials in Bakersfield wake up complicit on the genocide on the poor when we have $30 million that we can use to house everyone in Kern County, yet we fail to do that every day when there are over 4,000 vacant housing units sitting in Bakersfield, when this is 100% most likely impacting Black, Latinx, and low-income communities. And I also want to say that everyone here that also chooses to be silent on these issues is complicit in this. So if you refuse to speak up about this, that you are also complicit in these injustices. That's it.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to announce that Vice Chair Hibbard has now joined us on Zoom.
And I thank you for that. And also Mr. Rowland has joined us so that those through Zoom know that he's with us now. We'll go to the next speaker, Mr. Lane.
Madam Chair, it looks like Committee Member Prince also joined us through Zoom.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Prince.
Good afternoon. I appreciate this opportunity. Today I'm representing the Sierra Club, and I'm passing around some points I'd like to make today, hopefully fairly briefly. I want to start by saying this is very hard to track the money. Very, very hard to track the money. What I did on Monday was, and there are a couple of sheets attached to this that say summary of PSVS funding. What I did on Monday was to take the budget that was approved back in July and go to the budget workshop and pull out the figures for PSVS funding. And as you'll see, in 2019-20, $18,900, $900,000 were spent for, were allocated for parks. I'm talking specifically about parks and not about staffing, just about parks. For 2021, about 1 million, a little over 1 million was being allocated. Well, the figures I gave you were for Monday. On Tuesday, there was an announcement came out about the current plans for the funding, and consequently, some of these funds that were committed as contingencies in July by the City Council vanished, and some other funds got rolled into other pots. But the bottom line is this: we have committed, this city has committed $18 million for 2 outlying projects, Mesa Marin and Kaiser Permanente. We have asked, the Sierra Club consistently has asked for some kind of equitable distribution of the funding. Attached to this is the same list I've given before of the parks within 5 miles of where we're at now. Even the current plans are inequitable. They go in the opposite direction. Instead of targeting the low-income areas, again, they're targeting parks in the outside areas. So what you have, the attachment is one day dated. In here, as you read this, you'll see that there are, I've gone over the figures. What we need to do is to pause. Put a pause on this process. Here we were 2 days ago, announcement about a unique program process. Well, here they're talking about new grant money. You've got $19 million in your back pocket. Before you spend this $19 million, let's do a process like is being done here for a potential grant. So, and there are numerous examples that made the public. Here's the local residents seek to protect building for the black vets. This is what the city has been asked to provide money to buy that property. Here we are with the So, oh, this was back to the city plans for maintenance. The city plan back in July was 8 million for maintenance. That 8 million is now gone. We're down to something like 3 and pennies. So tracking the money is a big issue, but the ability for the public to be involved in this process is so critical. So I would encourage that you put a pause on this until you get some serious public input, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. And I just want to make sure, Julie, that the committee members who are attending over Zoom, I think they have this document. They were emailed before. If not, can we just make sure that they do get it? Thank you. Mr. Hunt?
Good afternoon. My name is Damon Hunt. I represent Dalpiva Industria. I submitted a business plan, but we don't have it available right now. Essentially, what we are is an organization that wants to partner with the Navigation Center and employ 24 on a rolling basis homeless individuals to help clean up the city. Encampment destruction involves park cleanups. We want to augment the success of public works, as well as other organizations. This requires buy-in from organizations like the BPD, because we can't do it ourselves, or else we'll be vigilantes. We received a lot of support already from the community, individuals around Centennial Park, individuals on the alleyway, on the Riverwalk. Essentially, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the issue that we see is that the encampments, they come, they leave, bunch of trash. We want to make sure that that doesn't occur any longer. If we have individuals homeless fighting homeless encampments, we believe that this will end it. The homeless individuals know where these encampments are. They know where they know where they're going to pop up. They know how people fluctuate, how people migrate. Our intent is to also to operate mostly at night. 12-hour shift with the individuals, with the homeless workers or homeless employees, 3-month commitments for 10 hours a week, receiving $250 stipends per week. Our organization will employ approximately 8 individuals full-time, and the bottom line is we require funding. As of right now, we're looking at an annual expense of 1.5. However, that could be reduced to 1.1 if we receive donations from the city regards to fleet vehicles as well as office space at the Navigation Center. I just wanted to come in today, plant a seed. I look forward to engaging further in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Hunt, before you step down, what was the name of your organization?
Dalpiva Industries.
So when we see that proposal, we'll be able to put a name with the proposal.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, I would acknowledge that a written proposal was included in the blue memo with the public comments for the committee for today.
Okay, I don't remember seeing that. Do you? Yeah? Okay, good. Mr. Turnipseed? And we have one more after that.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Michael Turnipseed. I represent the Kern County Taxpayers Association. I endorse what Mr. Lane has to say about his parks. When the city of Pittsburgh started its transformation years ago, they adopted a saying, if it's not good for everyone, it isn't good for anyone. And we continue to leave the disadvantaged people behind, whether it's our parks, whether all the issues of services. And we have talked about economic development, we've talked about parks, quality of life. There never seems, picking up trash and cleaning up weeds is all good, but that really isn't changing people's lives, except for the people that are getting paid to pick up the trash. We support Measure N, but we're coming to a point where we're going to have to look at correctly with a vision and allocation to maximize the benefit of the spending across all areas of the city. We need to start thinking of the big picture. Reading the staff report concerning last week's meeting, there was a question about the laterals and the allocation of staffing and all those things. We think the allocation of the Measure N positions to the general fund should happen on a quarterly basis. In the report, last week we heard there were 9 laterals in consideration to be hiring. The report said several. I'd like to know, is it 9? Is it 8? Is it what does several mean? That doesn't tell me anything. So we will work on that. In the big picture, another question came up last week in the meeting. When Measure N started, there were 1,400 employees in the city. Last week it said there's 1,800, and I was going back through trying to review how you got 400 people hired when it's more like close to 300 in my estimation. So I'd like to know where the rest of those hires came from since the general fund has been frozen. You know, we need to get back. We have had 1 full year of Measure N to 19 and 20, and so we need to get to the point of getting back to this vision. We need to estimate and come up with some big plans, I think. We keep talking about housing, and yet we really don't have a housing plan. It's a bit here and a bit there. And I'd like your committee to study and recommend to the council the establishment of a housing trust with a fixed commitment of Measure N money to that each season so we can build the trust. And then when we get enough money in the trust, we'll be able to leverage that money to get more things done. And I say I have 2 seconds left. It all gets back to having a strategic plan based on vision and purpose. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Turnipseed. Mr. Clegg, do you mind spending under a minute answering that question about staffing? I'm just curious as to the answer.
Yes, Chair, we can do that. I think Mr. Hewitt is better able to do that. And I think when we use broad terms like 1,400 and 1,800, there's typically, 14 something and 17 something, and we're making sort of, estimates there. But Mr. Hewitt can walk through that. And Mr. Turnipseed's correct that the PSVS ads have been more in the range of about 260 positions, but Chris can give those details.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Yes, so if we look at the authorized full-time complement of the city prior to the implementation of Measure N, we were at 1,539 full-time staff members. As of this fiscal year, the council adopted a full-time authorized complement of 1,782. I believe Mr. Turnipseed was referring to my comment about roughly 1,800 staff members. So there was a bit of rounding there, but I believe just north of 212 or so positions have been added from Measure N, and then again a total of 243 over the time period I just mentioned. So I hope that helps provide some context.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Our last public speaker, please, Ms. Waller.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair and committee, and both Chris's that I've had a chance to talk to. I'm here, I really want to try and touch on 3 topics if I can. If not, I'll come back. I really want to talk about the equitable distribution of funds, and I agree with 2 of the prior speakers who came up. As I do the work out in the southeast area, I'm still surprised at the huge inequity in multiple areas in that area. And when we talk about Measure N, my understanding that the voters thought this was an overall quality improvement of life that these dollars would be used for. Today, the one-line item that would directly improve their lives is substantial allocation of monies for our local parks, especially the parks that has been neglected for a lot of years. The MOK Park is one of those parks. Every week that I leave my gated community and drive out to the southeast area to serve, I'm surprised. This park, when we talk, and I'm sitting on many committees talking about equity, social justice, it's a trigger word, it's a funding word, but we must do the work and not just check box. And so I look at this park and I don't see children playing. I don't see families out there. The grass is brown. Huge void in buildings out in that area. I understand that this area does not have a lot of political power. It is a double-digit unemployed community. It is a food desert, no grocery stores, no transportation. Recently working with Cecilia, Jason, and Nina from the city, and Chris Clegg here, and getting a transportation grant, we hope to change that through our engagement in education. But I'm asking you to sincerely look at your budget, and I would love to see your data as it relates to any organization that target Black communities specifically. Have there been any dollars allocated to build capacity? The park is one thing, and I really would like to stress that that is critically important to the economic development of that area. The other thing that I want to talk about is a leadership program. I've been through 2 leadership programs, Kern Tax being one and Bakersfield Chamber being one. That was a huge game changer for me. But there weren't many people who looked like me. And we talk about equity building. We must intentionally go after that community and build leaders and train them on how to sit on boards. That is something that I have submitted a proposal for, not just a part, but for a leadership program. It is important that we partner with the city in order to do that. That's how we're going to close the gap, by building leaders. I won't be able to talk about my 3rd thing, but racial equity and building Black economic equity and youth programs is something that I believe that Measure N dollars should be used for. It is critically important, and I would love to know if it has been done up to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to close our public comment time. So we'll go back to number 2 on the agenda, the adoption of minutes. And while we're reviewing those, is there any way we could tell how many are viewing live? I'm also just curious about that number. There's no way of knowing. Okay. Just wait for a motion after those have been reviewed.
Motion by Committee Member Louie.
I'll second. This is Committee Member Tobias.
Thank you. All in favor? We'll do a roll call vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard, Vice Chair Hibbard, you're still muted. I'll move on. Committee Member Keller,
Yes.
Committee Member Halt,
Aye.
Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Prince,
Yes.
Rowland,
Yes.
Louis,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hibbard, can you respond?
Yes.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and open up to Mr. Clegg, you and your team.
Thank you, Chair. We don't have presentation materials for today. We actually, the new business item to consider the recommendations, we actually have some content to review with you on looking ahead to the annual budget process, but I think we would do that after any action is taken by the committee. We've provided those answers to those additional questions that were raised at last week's meeting. We provided that earlier this week, and would be happy to answer any other questions or offer any clarifications the committee would like to request.
Sure, so let's do that. If there's any other questions, we can start with Mr. Holt since he is ready with a question.
Okay, this will be quick. Just had more to do with the public comment. Mr. Lane brought up on parks that some of the contingency projects went away. Can you speak to that?
I can. I do appreciate the question, and we're very happy to sit down with Mr. Lane and walk through that, because I'm not sure where the perceived sort of vanishing of projects is. From our perspective, everything that this committee recommended up to the City Council and everything that the City Council adopted in those contingent projects remains in the plan. So I'm not sure actually what's being referenced to. All of those contingent projects are planned to move forward. Sort of the numbers that were being provided, again, I think would have to dig into some of those numbers, the 8 million, the 19 million, those don't sound familiar to me, but what we proposed in the budget is still in the budget, and we want to do those projects.
Quick follow-up while we're on parks. As far as the line item here today for parks, if I have this in my head right, there's $3 million that we're going to go to a deferred list, and that deferred list is leftovers from the budget process that just happened.
You got the Excel spreadsheet? Yes.
Correct. That is how we've approached it, that it was.
Just a little statement that says, here's what was paid, and some of this was wet, and some of this.
Is that Barry? Is that Mr. Hibbard? Okay.
It was, but he's on mute now.
Okay. And I, from what I could understand, yes, I think we're saying the same thing, that yes, we had actually provided a list of projects at the June 15th City Council Budget Workshop that were an additional $8 million of deferred maintenance for parks that we had identified as issues that need to be addressed. And we just started at the top of that list and said, if we had another 3 million, you know, what would we target in that deferred maintenance? That was largely based on analysis of staff of the age of each of those facilities, as well as just the need and the deterioration of those facilities. And so that's the attached spreadsheet represents, you know, sort of the first 3 million out of that $8 million list. As I have communicated in the past, we anticipate making a recommendation to the City Council and to this group to continue through that other items on that list in the annual budget process, but we thought this was an opportunity to get ahead on that $8 million deferred list and start working on it sooner.
And then the last question on the reserve contribution. I've asked this before, I just want to make sure it still stands. So the money that we put in reserve from Measure N is still earmarked, for lack of a better term, for Measure N priorities?
I'll have Mr. Hewitt speak to that.
Committee Member Holt, the amount that has been placed into the reserve from Measure N funds is truly for that purpose. It's for the reserve. It is part of the equation that gets us to our overall reserve goal of that 60-day reserve plan that this committee requested and that the council approved back in 2020, I believe, during that budget process. So we account for the PSVS funds within the reserve designation separately, so we know how much funding has been placed into that from PSVS, but it is strictly there as a reserve. And can be drawn upon for various purposes, but would likely be done so in the case where where there's a great need based upon economic circumstances, per se, as opposed to one-time funding for a project is really meant there to ensure the investment by the taxpayers.
Thank you.
I just want to comment on that since we're still on there. Appreciate you getting all the comparison to the other cities. It's incredibly interesting. Pre-Measure N, do either of you know what our target was?
Pre-Measure N, pre the recommendation of this committee, we did not have a structured reserve plan. We did have what's called a cash basis reserve, which I think Mr. McKeegan can confirm $12 million, $13 million thereabouts. But that wasn't really your traditional rainy day fund. And so again, through the work of this committee and through the work of the city council, we were able to actually start to allocate funds specifically for what's traditionally referenced as a rainy day fund. And as you see by the table, we're making very good progress. And again, this number is the culmination of a variety of different sources, but a good amount of that is PSVS. And as you mentioned, Chair Sanders, as it relates to the larger cities, Bakersfield is making good progress when you look at the comparable cities. We're really moving forward with this plan, and so we're proud of the accomplishments that we made here.
Thank you.
This is Connie. I have a quick request.
Mm-hmm.
Can they email us the link to the live stream? I'm getting messages that people can't find it.
Yes, Chair, we can email that link out to members of the committee.
So you're going to email it to Connie, and Connie can forward it to people who are asking her. Okay, just making sure. All right, I'll go to my left. Committee, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on the parks. I appreciate the list of projects. And I guess my question is more of a big picture commentary, which is, when we view Measure N funding, should we view kind of deferred maintenance projects differently than enhancement projects to the community? And how do we look at that? Because as I look at these projects, I mean, I'm sure a lot of them are needed and they're great and we need to get them done, but I think a lot of the community is looking for kind of game-changing quality of life type projects. And I know we probably have pinned up deferred maintenance, but I think Measure N should be, at least I'm thinking, maybe it's kind of a fantasy world I live in, I don't know. I'm thinking Measure N funds should be viewed as game-changing, community enhancement type projects for the community. And with these neighborhood parks, you know, improving those neighborhood parks, you know, beyond what we're thinking today. And a lot of that might be through neighborhood, you know, planning and visioning with the neighborhood or whatnot. But I'm trying to compare this list to that thought process, and in the view of staff, how's that work? How should we be viewing Measure N funds? Should they be game-changing, quality of life, big ticket items, or not big ticket cost-wise, but out-of-the-box thinking, I guess is what I'm trying to say, versus, you know, making sure the restroom, the sewer line's repaired or something like that. So.
I do appreciate the question, committee member, because I continue to sense some desire and maybe even a little bit of tension about what should Measure N be for. Should it be for about enhancements and new things versus existing things? And so I'll approach Measure N from a pretty broad perspective and then narrow it down to the parks example that you have provided. I think there may be some misunderstanding about what some of the other funding sources are and what those funding sources can do. So we actually do have some limited capital dollars that come to the city for parks, for example, specifically. As development occurs, we accrue some of those funds into park zones, and that we can build new parks as well as refurbish and do deferred maintenance on existing parks. But it's pretty limited, and it's largely targeted towards newer growth. So really it falls on the general fund to be able to do any of these park maintenance projects. But going back to the broader issue around policing, for example, if we want to add more police officers, it just falls to the general fund. There aren't really other funding sources. And the city has pursued grants and other opportunities. We know that, but it's very incremental. I mean, you're talking about maybe you get 2 officers for this grant, 4 officers for that grant. To make a big move on any other initiative or any other staffing, again, I want to be respectful that PSVS isn't about leaking or supplanting the general fund of what was existing services, because I hear that often. I get that. I understand the concern. I understand the desire. The reality of Measure N is that the city, the general fund, does not have the dollars to do any more than what we've been doing for the last decade. We've just been maintaining the levels of service, and we've been, in some instances, stretching thinner and thinner as the cost of doing business increases, and we have the same number of resources. We're actually slowly doing a little bit less with the general fund. And so it's not really about trying to supplant the general fund, but anything new is going to be Measure N. There are very limited opportunities to make adds on the general fund side. We may see a 2% growth, in sales tax revenues year over year, but that 2% is going to just barely keep up with continuing to provide services at that sort of same cost. So we could wait on some of this deferred maintenance, but it would be 5 years, 7 years before we get to some of these parks from the general fund. There just isn't money for those issues. And I think sometimes folks say, well, where does that general fund money go? It's not going anywhere. The general fund money is being spent to fund the same services that we've been funding. We just haven't been able to keep up with some of the deferred maintenance, and that's been just part of our reality. Some of the capital side, I wanted to go back and reflect that our transient and occupancy tax dollars do go towards capital projects. And so with those limited funds, we've been able to do a certain number of projects every year, but it is a question again of how long do we wait until things can make it onto that TOT list. But it's a long wait, and the city's not adopting any other new spending items in the general fund. We're not. There isn't other growth in the general fund that's going to other things that we aren't proposing here. There's just not other growth in other funding sources of the city, and so I think sort of that concern that if we're spending PSVS on this stuff, are we just are we wasting general fund money on other things? There isn't new general fund money that's going to other things. We're just, we're spending it on the same things we have been. So with that, it is an option for the Oversight Committee and the community to recommend, and to the City Council to say, is it better to use PSVS to not only address deferred maintenance, but then provide some park enhancements? Does that mean, some of the trade-offs in that might mean we do less parks, but we do the deferred maintenance and more enhancement of a particular park, but it means we do maybe fewer parks and spread them out over time, but it allows for some of those enhancements. I think we could probably also clarify what some of this deferred maintenance means, because some of it is enhancements. When you have a playground structure that is very old and kids don't use it anymore because maybe it's outdated and it's not the type of things that kids are interested in anymore, and you do a playground replacement, is that an enhancement or is that deferred maintenance? I mean, I think it's not really an argument. It's what do we mean by some of this? We're calling it deferred maintenance. We're saying we want to put a new playground in at MLK Park. We want to put a new playground in at University Park, and that will be a nice new benefit. If we wanted to add other enhancements to the park while we were at it, that is an option. I think, and I'm sorry I kind of am giving big picture and then giving some specific examples, but one more big picture perspective is that when we've had maybe a decade or 2 decades of limited resources to make these kind of investments, it's going to take some time to do some of that catch-up as we then make plans for how we're going to grow and move forward and do newer things and better things. And the reality is we're doing some of that at the same time. We've added rapid response teams. We've added the navigation center. We're doing some of that added value work, but frankly, we have some deferred issues that we have to ask ourselves, is it worth catching up and then building forward, or do we leave some of that stuff waiting and while we're doing fancy new stuff in other areas. It's just part of our reality is that there's not another funding source to go to. And so I would argue that I think there is a certain amount of deferred catch-up that probably makes sense so that we get to a standard that we agree is a reasonable standard. But we obviously do need to think about over the next 10 years, 20 years, what will be those game-changing investments in our streetscape corridors, game-changing investments in quality of life in our parks, game-changing investments in economic development. And many of those things are coming, but we have had some catch-up to do, and that's been part of this, some of these initial phases of investments. I would offer up, wasn't the exact question, but I think you'll see in the annual budgeting process many of the indicators of where we are going to head and where we'd recommend as staff heading, and they speak to many of the issues that have been raised by public comment today. For example, reinvestment in our older urban neighborhoods. I think we need to start setting aside monies like, more than a couple dollars, like several $1 million, $1-2 million a year for community revitalization. And you'll see some of those recommendations come in the annual budget process. Because we've been able to address some of those gnarly issues like homelessness and policing in these early phases of PSVS, it's now allowing us to say, okay, what do we do about economic development? What do we do about community development? So that is coming, but we still have some of that catch up. And I would reflect quickly that, again, this is the mid-year. We're having a pretty targeted recommendation about 2 key issues, homelessness and cleanups, from a very limited scope. But as we look at next year's annual budget and how we spend the full, $70 million plus, there will be some good opportunities to say, should we make some bold moves in revitalization? Should we make some bold moves in enhancing some of our corridor infrastructure? That'll be part of the conversation this year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I agree with much of what you said. It's good to hear that. And I want what I'm looking for is, maybe it's going to take some visioning with the community, but much of the comments I think you heard from the public today, and I think a lot of us up here feel this way, is, how do we make sure that we don't miss this opportunity with Measure N? It's such a huge opportunity for the community. The voters approved it, thinking it would be a game changer for the community, and I want to be able to celebrate that and and see some big ticket items, some big game-changing items happen in the community that we can all celebrate and come together as a community.
Thank you, and if I may, just I did want to take the opportunity to say agree completely with you, committee member, and that responsibility weighs heavy on me to make sure we don't miss this opportunity. And I know that the community has voice in that, and as does this committee and ultimately the city council. But I know in what we even conceptualize and propose and recommend influences that, and it does weigh heavy on me because this is the opportunity to basically write the next chapter of Bakersfield, and that does weigh heavy on me. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And I guess the question then becomes something we've mentioned in the past. Some of the things that we're funding now, there's a concern that those will become burdens upon the general fund in the future. And then with the outlook of, it's at least a possibility, the probability may not be high, but if Measure N is repealed and we no longer have the funding moving forward, say after 2022 when the next election comes, are we looking at things that are going to be committing us to a larger strain on the general fund in the future when we no longer have the extra funding?
Thank you for the question, committee member. I think we are conscious of what things will have a return on investment, and that will also help us gain some efficiencies, because I do think PSVS dollars, in my perspective, if they make the entire organization more efficient, that's an value added to the community. But I think it is a lens that we bring to it, but it is a fair concern because I don't think there's any way to spend this many dollars towards new initiatives and programs that wouldn't put a strain on the general fund if the tax weren't there. We can do a fair amount of capital projects that are sort of one time, but there's addressing homelessness and increasing public safety positions. Those are significant ongoing programs that, absent the measure would just go away, frankly. They would just stop. And some of our initiatives can be considered sort of time limited. It may be a 5 or a 10-year thing that after time, if we've gotten at a troubling issue, could we scale back some of our staffing because we've, actually solved some of our challenges, potentially. But I think, to answer your question directly, I think many of the activities of PSVS would put a strain on the general fund, again, if the tax wasn't there. I think even with the tax being there, I think part of the challenge on the general fund side is that there just wasn't an ability to do some of the long-range planning and forecasting because resources were so limited. We're actually in the process of developing a 20-year economic forecasting tool that will help us see the general fund and our enterprise funds and PSVS over a 20-year period, and it will help us know how much the general fund can handle over the next 10 and 20 years. So that is helping us, I guess, not overburden it. So some of the deferred issues we may be able to address better consistently over time. I guess that's the one area that it would allow us to not create a burden on the general fund. But otherwise, yes, I mean, many of these programs and initiatives would just stop if the funding stopped.
Okay, and in regards to what Mr. Turnipseed said about a strategic plan, I'm sure the city has a vision plan, whether it's 2030, 2040, something like that. As that gets developed, then would that have a two-faceted approach, one with funding from Measure N and one without?
Right now, at this point, I think to again be candid with this committee, our planning is based on an assumption that PSVS remains in place. I would reflect that the city does not have a 2030 or a 2040 specific document. The City Council has identified their strategy through their 8 City Council goals, though, so it's a separate document and a little bit of a different approach than a 2030 or 2040 vision plan. But we do recommend initiatives and actions within the 8 goal statements of the City Council, but it is based on an assumption that we will have this resource moving forward.
Okay, but a plan to be effective should also have like a time frame goal, right? I mean, you just can't have a goal without some sort of target to reach that goal.
I appreciate that as good feedback. I think there's been some desire from members of the City Council to conceptualize a longer-term vision. We're actually going through our economic development strategic plan right now, and there's been some conversation about leveraging that to create a longer-term vision. Just for what it's worth for this committee, I've been here with the city for just about a year now, and I have developed what I would view as key initiatives and themes that should be addressed over the next 10-year period within each of the 8 council goals. But that hasn't been something that's been presented to council and adopted as a vision plan per se. And so I think I'll take your comments as good feedback.
Just want to check on our committee members who are joining over Zoom if they had any questions.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. Just a couple to clarify and maybe piggyback on a couple of other earlier conversations. Presuming next year's funds is as the target, as you mentioned, Mr. Clegg, of roughly $70 million, do we know, how much of that would be carried over from decisions that were made previously that would need to be allocated from, last year's money? And B, on a general note, how much ongoing as an average or as a number might we see as ongoing costs as a result of new staff, maintenance of equipment, long-term leases for those, for equipment and those types of things?
Thank you, committee member. And I used the $70 million number because I think that's a safe number. That's the same number as this year. Our projections are indicating it will likely be an increase, but we still have to scrutinize those numbers. But so $70 million, I think, is a fair assumption. Of that, it's about $36 million has been allocated towards ongoing costs. Of those ongoing costs, about, of the total PSVS budget, the ongoing costs are about 35% personnel, and it's about 54%, again, of that total budget overall is ongoing. So there is a portion of those ongoing funds that are commitments like funding to the economic opportunity areas, funding to our redevelopment property acquisition funds that we've done in the past. We're assuming that many of those will continue to move forward over the next several years. So it's more towards about 35 to 40% are longer term ongoing commitments. Most of that is staffing. There are some other commitments like our contract for the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. We assume that will be an ongoing commitment to operate that facility. And so it's about probably, if I had to estimate, about 40% of the total PSVS budget are longer term ongoing commitments. I think those are the elements that answer that question.
They are, and thank you. And then the second is more so, I guess, a statement, aspirational more than a question, and that is, as you are looking toward next year's budget along with Mr. Tobias, I'll say I'd urge you to consider more, if you would, one-time investments, more bigger initiatives that don't necessarily have ongoing costs that will impact the three areas that we continue to have the most conversations around.
Thank you.
Mr. Prince, any?
Madam Chair. Yes, thank you so very much. Just piggybacking actually on some of the questions or statements that were made earlier. I know in previous meetings we discussed in regards to the possibility of coming up with a estimated percentage of the PSVS funds that would just be allocated to ongoing or longer term projects. And that percentage would be a percentage that we would want to stay in line with and make sure we do not exceed. And I don't think we ever confirmed a percentage of the overall budget for that, but I think that's something that we should address again and look at because it's easy to continue to spend money in, especially on items that are will develop a long-term overhead with PSVS that may down the line hinder us from moving forward with other needed projects due to the fact that we would not have the funds due to the fact that we have an allocated amount for a longer term. And then also, I wanted to look at expanding in regards to new areas of opportunities with the PSVS that community members have given me feedback on, such as improving the paving of our streets, particularly on the east side of town, where, according to the citizens there that I've spoken with, still are in dire strait and are not getting any type of attention towards improving the street pavings over there, as well as streetlights. In our project for increasing the visibility in our community, particularly on that side of the community where the streets are dark and more street lighting is wanted and needed for security purposes, as well as just enhancing that overall area. And so these are some of the things that I think these taxpayers had in mind of seeing when they voted to approve the PSVS. And to this date, they really have not seen any improvements in those particular, with those items. And so hopefully those items we can address, as well as make some and do some planning to make sure that our citizens see more of what their funds are being used for. Although indirectly they are being used, I would think, pretty conservative based upon improvements and enhancements and ongoing maintenance. But I also think we should be allocating funds for things that our citizens are in need of as well, that improves the vision of what they see with these funds. And I think that's all I had for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and leave it open. Mr. Hibbard, Ms. Perez-Andreessen, if you had any last questions, comments?
No comments. I think the other committee members handled it very well.
I did have one question. I emailed 5 questions after the last meeting, and one of my follow-up questions is for the ERP software. I asked what other funds would share in the cost of this software because it looks like Measure In is paying for 1/3 of that. And the response I received from staff is that the ERP upgrade is estimated to cost $15 to $20 million. As noted on February 4th, staff has recommended a $5 million allocation of PSVS funding to this project. Staff is working to issue a RFP for this platform prior to the start of the next fiscal year. The implementation timeline will be dependent on the outcome of the RFP, but staff anticipates a minimum of 18 months to complete the project. Upon completion, the new ERP will create significant workflow improvements and efficiencies among staff. As discussed on February 4th, prior to awarding an agreement with a vendor for the purchase and implementation of a new ERP, staff will finalize a cost-sharing plan to reflect the shared usage of the program across all departments and related operating funds of the city. The objective is to identify a formula that results in a proportionate share of the cost being accounted for based on factors such as a number of employees within a specific fund and operational share of the usage of the new system. Other funds that will share in the cost of the ERP will include the general fund, enterprise funds, refuse and sewer, and internal service funds, equipment funds, self-insurance fund. As noted in the presentation, the funding for the specific PSVS allocation is from one-time fund balance and not ongoing reserves. So my follow-up question is, it seems like the RFP won't be issued until the next fiscal year, and this could possibly go into fiscal year 2023. So why can't we consider allocating for the ERP system in next year's Measure In funding and allocate these $5 million this year to parks? Because it seems like the community, just based on some of the comments today, that's what they really want. So I would recommend that the committee consider doing that, is deferring these $5 million until next year and put that to parks. That's it.
Thank you. Were you going to answer? Were you going to comment on something?
Happy to, Chair.
Sure.
Thank you. Just some of the additional thought process behind the recommendation. And Committee Member Perez-Andreessen is correct that these funds would not likely be expended right away. I think how we thought about it is, rather than cut into a future year's annual allocation when we have that $30 million to decide what are the big projects that we're going to do. If we have to take 5 or 10 million out of that for PSVS in any given 1 year, it limits our ability to do those, annual projects at the time. This year-end balance being, unexpended, one-time monies, it's a good practice to put it towards, one-time costs, but I would acknowledge that, park capital improvements are one-time costs, and so that would be a reasonable use. But this is a good way to plan ahead and get ahead of a pretty big elephant to try and take in one bite, being the ERP system. The other thought I would add is that we're already anticipating committing significant funds in the annual budgeting process to parks. This is just some funds being spent at mid-year as one time, but we plan to put another large allocation, another $3-4 million towards parks in next year's annual budget. And we also have the consideration of just sort of capacity and phasing. Our staff would be hard-pressed to manage the capital improvements and the contracts for, all of the deferred maintenance all at once. That's why we were trying to kind of take it in probably a 2-year period to have them in more bite-sized chunks. But those are just some thoughts. I do expect that we will be spending a lot on parks in the upcoming budget process. And that's just how staff was thinking about funding several of our known, costs that are looming ahead of us.
Thank you for that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question. You said you anticipate in the upcoming budget, which would be the 2021-2022 budget, asking for or allocating more money for parks. Is that out of the general fund or a PSVS money?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. I was referencing PSVS monies. I would reflect that there will be some other funding sources like the TOT tax that I mentioned and some of these park zone funds that we will allocate towards local parks also. Like as an example, this year alone, we allocated $11 million towards parks from a variety of other funding sources. Some of that was grants, of course. But the 3 to 4 million I was talking about was PSVS.
I just have a couple questions, comments, and hopefully we can open this up for some actual voting. We hear from the public, here publicly and just in conversations throughout our professional lives outside of this table. And what I often hear is parks, right? I do. Public safety, I do. And public safety is such a large umbrella. And we hear even today just from the public comments about the priority for public parks. We hear you, we hear the public. Is there a strategic way to, I guess, prioritize these projects? Now, I know there's a task force that exists in the community. We don't need to create a new one. I know there's very, diverse task force that I think members here also sit on that would be able to sit down with either the city council or staff and evaluate what is important in some type of rating system, right? To get the strategic priorities from the public, have a rating system and see which of these projects are most important to them, right? They voted for this. I guess maybe that's far-fetched, I'm not sure. I see something like this working, as long as everyone's in agreement that, MLK may not be at the top, right? Maybe the lights on the east side and the road improvements will be number one, right? But just to have the feedback and an open dialogue, and everyone who's there is able to rate in some type of system, 2, 3, 1. I don't know. You don't need to comment on that. That's just kind of where my head is at in trying to plug everybody's interest into these funds. And my first take when we all are sitting here trying to just recommend, if everyone can keep in mind, this oversight is just to recommend to the city council. They have the final vote. You know, I teach my children. They go do a lemonade stand. You can make the money, right? Anyone can make it, but it's a smart person who will save it. And so I hate to keep coming back to the reserves, but that's where my mind is. And I mean, is this reserve also part of like an emergency fund? What if an earthquake comes and the whole city, you know, needs significant repair? Is that out of these funds, or do we have separate emergency funds? Because we just saw, you know, this last year, the unpredictable nature of what COVID did, but yet right before COVID, I don't think we recommended, but the city council approved replacing the seating at Spectrum Theater. You know, upgrades to the arena. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars went towards those projects, right? It's like, where can we meet the public in the middle, right? I realize, you know, some of the comments are hard to meet in the middle, just logically, but that's just my take for the record. Before we all start voting, I just want everyone to remember that we are here to provide our recommendations the way we see and we hear from. So, noted.
If I may, Chair, you suggested I didn't have to, but I'm happy to provide some thoughts. And some of this conversation is reflected in the slides that we're going to cover after the vote on looking ahead. We have heard clearly from this group and from the community a desire to have more process in the vetting of potential ideas and concepts. We've planned for that in the annual budget process, not the mid-year budget process, again, because it's far more narrow in scope. And many of the things I think people have suggested today would be things to consider in an annual budget process. I think the good news is this committee has wanted to have some more public input, and today we got some more public input. I mean, that's a win, I think. What I would reflect about some of that, though, you know, looking forward and thinking ahead, the democratic process is the best process that we have for decision making, but it is an imperfect process. Regardless of how much outreach and input we get, it will still be representative of the community and not, you know, get every voice that is there. I think the chair is correct that the city council also views themselves as very in tune with the public and listening to the public and getting that same feedback that you're getting as well. And so when they make their ultimate decisions, it's based on input that they've also received as who they represent every citizen in every ward of the community. And so their decisions are part of that democratic process as well. So I think, you know, having been a professional that, you know, that does this for many years now, and we address this on lots of other issues day in and day out, I'm very interested in increasing the amount of feedback and participation, but there's no sort of perfect formula for getting the precise, you know, community represented decision. We're going to find some ways to get more input, more feedback, and be representative of the community. And some of the balances of, you know, having a city council and having a professional staff are to balance all of those interests. And so it is not, I can't remember what the term that you used, Chair, but it is not far-fetched. It is not a far-fetched concept to have some folks come together and sit down and talk about priorities. We'll reflect a few things that we think we can do to get some more of that feedback on the table. I think particular to certain topics, though, I think in some instances, I think that the mandate has been pretty clear, you know, around homelessness and around public safety. I think, you know, the direction's been pretty clear from this committee and from the city council. Other topics like community revitalization and economic development and parks and beautification, I think there's been some more discussion about what really should be some of those priorities. And so I do think there are additional ways definitely to do that. And some cities have actually developed pretty thorough and almost sort of slightly bureaucratic processes to get like voting systems from the public, and that's something that we've done some homework and research on, and I'm not recommending that for this year because I don't think we could frankly pull it off. But there are good ways that we can get some good feedback on these topics of what are priorities. Let me just reflect really quickly to answer a specific question about emergency funds, because Chair and others notice us shaking our heads here in chambers, but for those listening in or watching online, the city does not have other funding sources for an earthquake or a disaster. These funds are intentioned, these reserves are intentioned for a catastrophic event, a downturn in the economy. We've been fortunate in this pandemic, even though it's a downturn in the economy, that with CARES dollars and careful planning and PSVS, we've been able to still actually do new stuff in the middle of an economic downturn, which, by the way, is pretty unheard of amongst other cities out there. And so there's actually good news in that PSVS is allowing us to do new and more while everyone else is just holding the line or even constricting, but I'm off topic. There are not other funds, and so these reserves are a good idea for that rainy day. I think we can also set aside reserves, as I mentioned in our last meeting, for big known projects or big known issues that we know that we need to address. But there is that balance between delivering to the community what it is they want in the near term versus how much of those reserves should be held. If you hold too many reserves and never do any improvements, then I think there's some frustration from the community in that aspect as well. So it's a balancing act, and we've looked at best practices in reserves and how much should be there, and it's wise to build those up and still be able to deliver some of the things that the community would like to see.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. Did you have another comment? Go ahead.
I think one of the things that I've discovered in this year on this committee is that the committee and the city council don't communicate well. I mean, obviously, we vote on issues and things, and then those things are, again, then voted on by city council or approved by city council after the committee recommends them. But what I think we need to improve on is a way for the committee to make recommendations to the city council on issues that the committee feels is important that haven't necessarily been addressed, as the committee would say, adequately. So that being the case, I am going to make a motion that this committee recommend to the city council that they direct city staff to formulate a plan to set aside a significant amount of PSVS money in the upcoming budget for the revitalization of blighted areas of Bakersfield, including and focused on Old Town Kern and Southeast Bakersfield. So that's a recommendation to this committee that we make that resolution to direct city council or ask city council to direct city staff to set aside a significant amount of future PSVS money for the revitalization of those blighted areas that we talked about today. So we don't have to vote on that right now.
Sounds like we have a motion. We have a motion on the table then. Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Do we have a second?
Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. All those in favor?
Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Yep,
Madam Chair?
Please.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee Member Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Rowland?
Aye.
Louis,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rowland, for that motion. I think we're all in agreement that the recommendation hopefully will be heard by the ears of the city council, and they will take it seriously. So with that, should we open up, if there's no other dialogue, questions or comments? I know that we have, in the past, went line item by line item. And again, I know I've already reminded everybody, we're here to provide recommendations. So even after a motion or a second and a vote, please feel free to take a moment and give your take, your opinion on your vote, preferably if it's a no vote, but if you still wanted to add something, if it's a yes vote, please feel free to do so. That is what makes this committee and our time worthwhile, knowing that the city council will read our suggestions.
If we may offer some assistance, Chair, to just put up on the screen
Yep.
some of the prior recommendations.
You know, while you're doing that, I will just note that there have been successes this past year. I do hear from the public that the homeless facility has been a success, and that is going really well. And so we're really happy about that, or I am anyway. Is this the first item? Yes. And I just want to make sure that our committee members on Zoom, you're able to see the slide. Maybe just, yeah, Barry's nodding. So we'll go ahead and start with the first line item, Digital Public Safety Regional Radio Project. We will wait for any discussion or a motion.
I make a motion that the committee recommend to the council approval of the Digital Public Safety Regional Radio Project for $3 million.
Second by Committee Member Louis.
We received those, thank you.
So they're not going to be played like regular city council?
No. But each of the committee members did receive those. We have a motion and a second. Can we go ahead and do a roll call vote?
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Member Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Holt,
Aye.
Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Prince,
Yes.
Rowland,
Yes.
Louis,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
If anybody would like to leave a comment on that, feel free to just hop right in. If not, we'll just move to the next item. All right.
I have a
Oh,
question.
go ahead. Go ahead, Barry.
Chairman. Do we have a clear vision as to the overall cost? These are incremental costs that are going. I think we've covered it, but I wanted to just make sure. It was originally the 17 million. Is that correct?
That is correct, committee member. We still assume a cost of 17. We have set aside 9. This would make the total now 12.
Thank you. Is there any expectation that it goes over the 17? And is there a maintenance cost that needs to be built in, kind of as a recurring cost that we should be thinking about?
Thank you, Chair, or thank you, committee member. The one factor that may impact this more than others is, again, the economies of scale we have in jointly doing this with the county. If that were to change, it could potentially have a substantive impact to the costs. Otherwise, we do think that this is a good estimate on costs. There will be some ongoing maintenance costs. This project actually does two different things. It upgrades core infrastructure like towers, but it also buys some of the equipment that will get replaced over time. However, those equipment replacements will be part of one of our internal service funds and will be budgeted for and planned for on an ongoing basis. This is really to do a big overhaul of a system that's more than 20 years old, and so we don't anticipate other notable costs coming out of project requests in the near future, because we'll be setting aside those maintenance rates in our internal service funds.
Thank you.
All right, next line item, enterprise resource planning.
Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. I'll make that motion that we recommend to the City Council that they approve this project.
Second by Committee Member Louie.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call vote.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
No.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
Yes.
Louis?
Aye.
And Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is approved with Perez Andreessen voting no.
If Committee Member Perez Andreessen, if you wanted to leave any comments and suggestions, feel free to do.
Yeah, just the same comment I made earlier. I think this is probably going to be implemented in either fiscal year 2022 or 2023. So I think the City Council should consider allocating funds to that project in a later fiscal year and allocating these $5 million to parks.
Noted. We'll go to the next line item, neighborhood parks deferred projects.
This is Connie Perez Andreessen. I make a motion that we approve this.
Tobias, second.
Thank you. We'll do the roll call.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
Yes.
Louis?
Aye.
Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Was there another slide?
There is, however, there's one last item on this slide, the reserves.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I already made that motion and second in my head. City reserves rainy day fund.
Tobias, I'll move recommended to the City Council to approve that $4 million line item. It's consistent with PSVS allocations.
Second.
I, Frederick Prince, approve it. I'm sorry. I, Frederick Prince, will second that motion.
We'll do a roll call.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
Yes.
Louis?
Aye.
Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Chair, the next slide is on the screen representing the limited one-time, or the limited ongoing funds for homelessness and cleanup.
We'll start with the first item, Code Enforcement Rapid Response Team.
Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. I'll make that motion that we recommend approval of this to the City Council as being within the realm of the PSBS.
Committee Member Holt will second.
Before we do a roll call vote, I will open that back up for public comment. If you can keep it under a minute.
So regarding Code Enforcement Rapid Response Team, we already have several Code Enforcement Rapid Response Teams that totally exist right now. And currently, we still see that there's an issue among all the requests, all the service requests that come in. I don't want to sound cold, but if we can, and this is just an analogy, upper lip hair, okay? We have, you shave, comes back, razor bumps, all that good stuff. That's what's happening right now with code enforcement. What I'm suggesting with Dalpiva is electrolysis, so that we eliminate the homeless encampments completely. Okay, code enforcement will not clean up these camps because there's clearly evidence of residuals. All right, thank you.
Thank you. We do have a motion and a second. If there's no other comment of the committee members, go ahead, Mr. Rowland.
The city clean initiative coordinator, is this a new position that you want to hire?
Yes, committee member.
Is that this item or the next item?
Well,
Or are they all
Mitchell
together?
just jumped down to
Okay.
a question that's coming. And that's okay. We prefer clarity as we're voting on these. Are we good? So we do have a motion and a second. If we go ahead and open the roll call vote, please.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Members Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Holt,
Aye.
Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Prince,
Yes.
Rowland,
Yes.
Louis,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. The Differential Response Pilot Program.
Tobias recommends approval of differential response pilot program at $135,000, and that it's consistent with PSVS allocation.
Madam Chair, this is Keller. I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. We'll open up for a vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Members Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Holt,
Aye.
Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Prince,
Yes.
Rowland, Louis,
Aye.
Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
The next line item, Downtown Security Patrol Expansion.
Committee Member Holt will make the motion that it is in line with the projects, programs, and services described within the measure.
Thank you.
Roland will second the motion.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Members Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Holt,
Aye.
Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Prince,
Yes.
Rowland, Louis,
Aye.
Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Downtown waste cleanup and expansion.
Madam Chair, this is Ken Keller. I'll make that motion that this is consistent with the out confines of the PSPS measure and make recommendation to the City Council.
Second by
I'll second.
We'll do a roll call vote.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland? Louis?
Aye.
Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. The Clean City Initiative Coordinator. We'll wait for a motion, just so everybody knows. As chair, I cannot start with the motion.
Madam Chair, I'll make that motion that we recommend to the City Council that this is consistent with the projects outlined within the PSVS.
Thank you.
This is Fred Prince, and I second that motion.
Thank you. Roll call?
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
No.
Louis?
Aye.
And Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is approved, with Committee Member Roland voting no.
Mr. Rowland, would you like to leave any comments, suggestions for the city?
I just want to caution the committee and city staff and the city council about hiring positions with Measure N money that's making a commitment for many years to come with Measure N money. That's all.
Thank you for that. Next line item, citywide weed and nuisance vegetation abatement program. What, did I skip one?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Committee Member Holt will make the motion that it's in line with projects, programs, and services described within the measure.
And Madam Chair, Mr. Keller will second that, please.
Thank you. Roll call?
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen?
Yes.
Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
Yes.
Louis?
Aye.
And Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Sure, please.
I'd just like the comment that I made at the last meeting concerning working with the Homeless Collaborative. I know the citywide, the program that we already had going, there were some vendor ties to that. I'm actually putting the homeless people to work, and I just want to make that comment that hopefully this fits in line with that as well.
Thank you, committee member. Just to clarify one aspect of this, this is a preventative abatement program that sprays in advance of vegetation. And so we will explore whether that applies. It's less applicable than the crews that are out removing vegetation and doing litter and debris, but we'll absolutely explore that. And we've been very fortunate to have additional work crews under the Clean City Initiative. The 6 crews that we hired, 4 of those are from the Bakersfield Homeless Center. And so we absolutely look for opportunities to expand that program when we can.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
Provide a statement. This is Fred Prince. I'm just asking for, through this program, it indicates here that they will be using a private firm in support of the beautification efforts, that they put this out to bid each year in regards to providing these services for the city, since it is an ongoing usage of a outside or private firm in which they will be contracting, that the public is allowed to make bids in regards to this particular implementation.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. I also agree with that suggestion to bid that out annually. All right, any other comments? Nope, suggestions? Could it be?
So,
I just
Chair,
have, I'm sorry, I have one more comment.
Please.
Can I request that staff commit to providing us materials for any upcoming meetings at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting? We discussed this at the last meeting, so I'd just like some sort of commitment from staff.
yes, committee member and chair and committee members, we make that commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, I sense we've spent a lot of energy, and that energy is a little lower now than at the beginning of the meeting, but appropriately so. And instead of trying to belabor the last section of our presentation, I'll kind of move through it a little bit more quickly. I think because in many aspects we've already covered several of the things we wanted to cover in the last section, which were getting some feedback from this group about what they want to see in the annual budget process. I think we've gotten a lot of feedback about that, both specific projects as well as just the process itself. And we wanted to just highlight some of the process points. So we are in the third year of implementation. We do think that we'll probably see some growth there, but and we hope to bring back more than $70 million in proposed projects and funding allocations, but we'll bring those numbers as they get refined. I did want to comment on the new positions piece because that's something that's been important to me just from a administrative and fiscal perspective, but I know it's been an important issue for the community. We have been trying to, like I said, catch up and do some of the right sizing of the organization, and that has just been one of the needs of the city. I think we're getting much closer to that, and so we've communicated to departments that requests for positions would be limited to those topics that would have measurable outcomes directly tied to city council goals. I do think there will be a fair number of things to consider for this group. The public safety side alone, you know, we still have that 1/3 of the public safety hiring that has been, you know, part of the commitment of Measure N, which will be the bulk of those. But I would still anticipate a fair number of strategic roles that the city would propose that get at the core issues that the community has raised today, as well as that we just continue to hear from them. I would communicate to you that we still anticipate having probably 15 million plus in projects, capital projects, and we're going to focus those on localized and neighborhood-centric projects, something that we heard clearly last year and through this last year as well. And we do anticipate carrying forward, as I mentioned, that about $36 million of those ongoing commitments. And we'll be working in some of the same buckets that we talked about before around economic development, quality of life, and public safety. It will be less compressed than last year. It'll be still somewhat interesting to see where we're at by March and April and May as far as being able to convene, you know, more easily. It's likely to be workshops in this same format, or perhaps by Zoom, because we're not able to gather 100 people in a school gym and, you know, get that kind of feedback that way. And so it'll likely still be this hybrid approach with the use of technology. We absolutely are interested in getting feedback from this body, and so the first workshop that we have, we're targeting that towards late March. And there will, just on the materials piece, I wanted to be upfront that we will provide some materials up front, but it's not going to be as extensive because we're really going to cover a lot of that information in the workshop. We're not going to be making decisions in that first workshop. We're just going to be laying the foundation for the budget process. And then we anticipate having additional workshops in April, and would look probably to have a late April sort of final workshop with this group. We'll have our department heads more available than we did last year, both from a timing and just from a sort of pandemic perspective, so that we can answer questions and go over issues. And then interestingly, I've mentioned this a couple of times now, but there are two key areas where I feel like the community input and the committee input is really important, and that is around economic development and community development is one area. The other area is this sort of parks and beautification piece. How do we allocate our funds this year and going forward around parks? And so we'd like to actually have some workshops that open it up to some pretty broad comment and a lot of back and forth and those conversations. And my intent was to test today the appetite of this committee to sort of host those workshops. I anticipate the answer is yes, given the dialogue today. And interestingly, we've heard about East Side investment. The two areas that this committee recommended today are on my list for those considerations. The other areas that have been discussed are Kentucky Niles and the Lowell Park area, in addition to Old Town Curran and MLK Park area as Southeast Bakersfield. And so we'd like to have some conversation in those workshops about what does reinvestment and revitalization look like, and where do we prioritize. So that'll be part of the process for the way we fund PSVS for this year. In the bigger picture, just so that you're aware of some of the dates that we have with the City Council, working back from June with their ultimate budget adoption, we're going to have workshops with City Council in May. That's why we want to start in March with this Oversight Committee through the end of April, so that we can then get to the City Council in early May and work forward from there. And I believe we've covered our topics.
Thank you. When does this recommendation get in front of the City Council members?
It will be next Wednesday evening.
So they have enough time to
Correct.
review once somebody from City Council staff gets all of our comments. Okay.
Yes, we will provide it as part of the City Council packet that goes out tomorrow.
Just one last comment as you were going through the year ahead, and just the importance again of the importance of parks, the revitalization of parks, especially on the east side, as Mr. Rowland mentioned. If there was a way, as we start to talk about that, and if we find a way to see what priorities are for the community, it would be my recommendation to suggest a way that the community can participate in the upgrades to their parks, right? To have the community be vested in the upgrades so that they have, ownership, pride over not just what the city comes in and revamps and replants trees and replaces sidewalks in the parks or even play equipment, but that we find a way that the community can help and be a part of those work days. Just some way. There's got to be a way. So with that, any other comments as we wrap this meeting up?
One very quick one. With regard to parks and the, especially MLK Park and those areas, it's not probably going to be enough just to make the grass green and trim up the trees. We need to make those parks safe for people to come to. The families that want to come and use those parks need to feel safe. So I think that we ought to possibly explore this, the option of police officers being stationed at those parks in some form or fashion, or increased patrol, and maybe even private security patrol. But we have to make it attractive and secure for them to come and play at those parks. Thank you.
All right. If there's no other suggestions, comments from the Zoom participants? Barry, I see you took your microphone off. Did you want to say any last closing statements?
I have a request
Excellent.
and a follow-up to what Committee Member Rowland brought up previously. In the last set of bullets, we talked about the previously approved positions and programs. And I think the police summary, the staffing details that were supplied were really spot on and a good summary of what's going on. And I think Committee Members Rowland's concern about the growing fixed cost of hiring with Measure N money, it would be good to keep a running total of where are we at so far, and then even project what does this grow to over time. Because as we know, these initial commitments don't stay at that level. They keep growing. And so how do we make sure our percentage of Measure N money that's going towards staffing is kept within a range that's acceptable, and the majority is going towards one-time projects, not part of a growing city budget?
Thank you, Barry.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Sure.
Something that Committee Member Hibbert actually mentioned in the past too, I believe should be addressed, and that is, instead of hiring a permanent city employee in which you have to pay all of their health benefits, their retirement plans, and so on and so forth, the city should consider contracting some of these services out so that we're only committed for a year at a time to some of these projects and positions. And I think a lot of these things could be subcontracted out.
All right, see no other comments. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Have a great week.